They stood up in front of the whole galaxy and exposed humanity's greatest weakness, and they were not lying. That is the thing I have to make you understand before anything else. The weakness was real. They did not fabricate it, did not twist it, did not invent a flaw to slander a rival. They revealed a true thing about humanity, a genuine vulnerability in front of every power in the galaxy, expecting it to destroy Earth's alliances overnight. And by morning, every treaty in the room had been rewritten, but not the way they intended. Because they had exposed humanity's greatest weakness, and they had been right that it was a weakness, and they had been catastrophically, completely wrong about what that weakness meant. By the time the night was over, the thing they had exposed to shame humanity had instead shamed them, and the treaties that did not survive the night were not Earth's. They were their own. I am Liaison Tomas-Vel of the neutral Coredd, and I was in the room that night, the great summit where the HFY delegation stood up to expose Earth's weakness and shatter humanity's standing in the galaxy. I watched the whole thing. And I am going to tell you what humanity's weakness actually was, and what the HFY did with it, and why it backfired so completely that it changed the galaxy. Because what happened that night taught every power in the room a thing about strength and weakness that none of us had understood before, and that humanity, alone among us, had understood all along. You have to understand the summit and the galaxy's way of doing diplomacy, because the HFY gambit was built on it and the whole thing turned on it. The summit was a great gathering of the galaxy's powers, a periodic event where the major species came together to negotiate the treaties and alliances that held the galactic order together. It was, like all galactic diplomacy, a game of concealment. That was simply how it was done. Every power came to the summit hiding its weaknesses, projecting strength it might not have, concealing its fears and its limits and its vulnerabilities, because the galaxy's whole diplomatic culture was built on the assumption that to reveal a weakness was to invite attack. That strength came from appearing invulnerable, that the powers who survived were the ones who never let anyone see where they could be hurt. We were all, every species at that summit, wearing masks, projecting confidence, hiding our soft places, playing the ancient game of looking stronger than we were. It was exhausting and it was universal and no one questioned it, because it was simply what diplomacy was. Except humanity. And that was the thing that made the HFY gambit possible, and the thing that made it backfire. Because humanity did not play the game of concealment. They never had. From the moment humanity arrived in galactic diplomacy, the older species had been baffled and faintly scandalized by the human way of doing it, which was, simply, to be honest. Humans came to the summit and said true things. They admitted their limits. They acknowledged their fears. When a human delegation did not know something, they said so. When humanity was vulnerable somewhere, they did not pretend otherwise. Humans negotiated with a radical, almost reckless openness that the rest of the galaxy found incomprehensible. A refusal to wear the masks everyone else wore. A habit of just telling the truth about themselves, including the unflattering truth, including the truth about where they were weak. The galaxy had never known what to make of it. Most of us read it as naivety, the foolishness of a young species that had not yet learned the hard rules of diplomacy, that would surely, eventually, learn to conceal and posture like everyone else once it had been burned enough. We watched humanity's openness and we thought, they are weak, and worse, they are foolish enough to show it. We did not understand that we were watching the strongest thing in the room. We thought we were watching a vulnerability. And the HFY decided to exploit it. I have to tell you about the HFY, because their nature is the whole engine of the story. The HFY were a powerful, ancient, and deeply political people, masters of the game of concealment, the most skilled practitioners of mass diplomacy in the galaxy. Where other species merely played the game, the HFY had perfected it. They were a culture built entirely on the management of appearances, on never revealing a true thing, on the manipulation of perception as the highest art. To an HFY, the surface was everything, and the truth beneath it was a weapon to be hidden and deployed. They had risen to power through the masterful concealment of their own weaknesses and the masterful exposure of everyone else's. And they were, at that summit, humanity's chief rivals, because humanity's growing influence threatened the Esh, and because the Esh found humanity's whole open, honest way of being not just threatening but offensive, an affront to everything the Esh believed about how power worked. And the Esh had a plan to destroy humanity standing in a single night. They had studied humanity, the way the Esh studied everyone, looking for the weakness to expose, and they had found one. A real one, because humanity, in their openness, had not hidden it. The weakness the Esh found was this. Humanity, the Esh had determined, was by the galaxy's standards genuinely vulnerable in ways humanity freely admitted. Humans grieved their dead openly and were slowed by it. Humans admitted fear and uncertainty. Humans acknowledged the limits of their power, the places their reach fell short, the things they could not do. Humans, in their treaties and their dealings, had been honest about their vulnerabilities, had told their allies plainly, here is where we are weak, here is where we will need your help, here is what we cannot do alone. And the Esh looked at all this freely admitted human vulnerability and saw the perfect weapon. They would gather it all, every admission of weakness humanity had ever made, every acknowledgement of limit and fear and need, and they would lay it all out in front of the whole galaxy at once, and they would say, look at how weak they are. They have told you themselves. Why would you ally with a people this vulnerable? Abandon them. Ally with us instead. It was, by the logic of the galaxy's concealment diplomacy, a devastating attack, and the Esh were certain it would work. The night of the summit, the Esh sprang it. I was there. I will never forget it. The lead Esh delegate, a being named Vasek, a master of the diplomatic kill, rose during the great session when all the powers were gathered, and he did the thing no one did, the thing that was itself a kind of violence in the galaxy's concealment culture. He began publicly to expose another power's weaknesses. He laid out humanity's vulnerabilities, one after another, in front of the entire assembled galaxy. Every admission of weakness humanity had ever made, gathered and arranged and presented as an indictment. The humans grieve their dead and it slows them. They have admitted this. The humans fear, and say so, here are their own words. The humans cannot project power as far as they claim, they have acknowledged it themselves. The humans depend on their allies for things they cannot do alone, they have told you so directly. On and on, a devastating catalog of human vulnerability, every word of it true, every word of it drawn from humanity's own honest admissions, presented to the galaxy as proof that Earth was weak, foolish, unworthy of alliance. A vulnerable people who would drag down anyone who stood with them. The room went very quiet. I felt the alliances in the room begin to tremble. Because by the galaxy's logic, Vasek was right. He had exposed real weaknesses, and in a galaxy where weakness invited abandonment, the powers allied with humanity began, visibly, to waver, to reconsider, to wonder whether they had bound themselves to a people too vulnerable to be worth the binding. I watched treaties begin to die in real time, watched delegates exchange the glances that mean perhaps we have made a mistake, watched the Esh gambit begin, exactly as planned, to shatter humanity's standing in the galaxy. And then the human delegate stood up to respond, and what she did broke the Esh gambit so completely that I have spent the rest of my life trying to understand it. The human delegate was named Ambassador Sarah Chen, and she did not do what every instinct of galactic diplomacy said she must do. She did not deny the Esh's charges. She did not counterattack, did not expose Esh weaknesses in return, did not deflect or spin or posture. She did not put on the mask. She took it off, further than it had ever been off, and she did the single most disarming thing I have ever witnessed in a lifetime of diplomacy. She agreed. She stood up in front of the whole galaxy, after the Esh had spent an hour cataloging humanity's weaknesses as a devastating attack, and she said, simply and warmly and without a trace of shame, everything Delegate Vasek just said is true. All of it. We do grieve our dead, and yes, it slows us, because the people we lose matter to us and we will not pretend otherwise. We do feel fear, and we say so, because pretending not to be afraid has never once made anyone safer. We can't project power as far as some of you can, and we've never claimed we could. And yes, we depend on our allies for things we can't do alone, and we've always told them so plainly because that's what honesty between friends looks like. She paused and looked around the silent room. Delegate Vasic gathered all of this up and presented it to you as our weakness, and he's right that it's vulnerability. But I want to ask all of you a question before you decide what it means. Vasic spent an hour telling you true things about us, things we told you ourselves, openly, long before tonight. So here's my question. She turned and looked directly at the Esh delegation. What has the Esh delegation ever told you that's true about themselves? What weakness have they ever admitted? What vulnerability have they ever shown you? They've just demonstrated, in front of all of you, exactly how good they are at exposing other people's truths. Ask yourselves what they're hiding about their own, and ask yourselves which kind of ally you'd actually rather have. The one who tells you the truth about where they're weak, or the one who's so good at hiding weakness that you'll never see the knife until it's in your back. The room went very, very still, and I felt the treaties begin to move again, but in the other direction now. Ambassador Chen's question hung in the air, and I watched it do its work, and the work it did was the unmaking of everything the galaxy thought it knew about strength. What has the Esh ever told you that's true about themselves? It was so simple. That was the devastating thing about it. It was not a clever counterattack, not a brilliant maneuver, not a masterstroke of the concealment diplomacy the Esh had spent millennia perfecting. It was just a question, an honest question, that pointed at the one thing the whole room had been trained never to look at: the difference between a people who tell you the truth and a people who don't. And once Chen had pointed at it, the whole room could see it, and once they could see it, the Esh gambit was dead, because the gambit had depended on no one ever asking that question. I felt the alliances in the room stop trembling toward abandonment and begin, slowly, to turn the other way. Because every power in that room was now doing the calculation Chen had set up for them, the calculation the Esh had never wanted them to do. They were looking at humanity, who had just stood up and openly, warmly, without shame, confirmed every weakness that had been thrown at them. And they were looking at the Esh, who had just demonstrated in front of everyone exactly how skilled they were at gathering and weaponizing the truths that others revealed. And the powers in that room were asking themselves the question that actually matters when you are choosing who to bind your fate to. Which of these two can I trust? And the answer was obvious. It was so obvious that I do not understand how the galaxy had managed not to see it for so long. I have to explain the turn properly, because it is the heart of the whole thing, the thing that changed how I understand strength. The galaxy's entire diplomatic culture rested on the belief that concealing your weakness made you strong and revealing it made you weak. And the Esh Gambit had been built on that belief: expose humanity's weakness, and humanity becomes weak. Humanity becomes weak, and their allies abandon them. It was airtight logic, by the rules everyone had always played by. But Chen had just exposed the flaw in those rules, the flaw the whole galaxy had been living inside without seeing, that the rules confused strength with trustworthiness, and that in alliance, trustworthiness is the only strength that matters. Because what is an alliance, really? It is a wager. It is binding your fate to another powers, trusting them to stand with you, to do what they say, to be there when you need them, and not turn on you when it is convenient. And you cannot make that wager safely with a people whose true nature you cannot see. The whole galaxy had spent its history allying with masks, binding their fates to powers whose real weaknesses and real intentions were carefully hidden, and calling it safe because everyone projected strength. And it had never been safe, because you cannot trust what you cannot see, and a power skilled enough to hide its weaknesses from you is exactly a power skilled enough to hide its betrayals. Humanity's openness, which the galaxy had read as weakness, was in fact the one thing that made them a safe ally, the only kind of ally you can actually trust, because they show you everything, including the unflattering everything, and a people who will tell you the truth about where they are weak are people who will tell you the truth about everything else too. You always know where you stand with them. There is no hidden knife, because they do not hide anything. And the Esh, in their masterful concealment, were the opposite, a people whose every surface was a constructed lie, who had just demonstrated their genius for weaponizing other people's truths, and with whom you could therefore never, ever know where you actually stood. The galaxy had been about to abandon the trustworthy ally to side with the manipulative one, on the grounds that the trustworthy one had admitted weakness, and the manipulative one had projected strength. Chen's question made everyone see the catastrophe of that logic, all at once. Delegate Vasek tried to recover. Of course he did. The Esh were masters, and a master does not concede a dead gambit without a fight. He rose again, and he did the thing the Esh always did, the thing that had always worked. He reached for the mask, projected confidence, attempted to reframe Chen's question as naive, to paint human honesty as the foolishness it had always been taken for. The human ambassador, he said smoothly, speaks prettily of honesty. But honesty in diplomacy is not virtue, it is incompetence. A power that reveals its weaknesses to its enemies is a power that will not survive. The humans have simply confessed in front of all of you that they do not understand the most basic principle of survival, that you do not show your throat. I ask you not to be moved by sentiment. The humans are weak, and they have proven it twice over now, once by being weak, and once by being foolish enough to admit it. And it was a good recovery. By the old rules, it might even have worked. But the old rules were dying in that room, and Vasek did not understand that yet, and Ambassador Chen did. Because Chen stood again, and she did not argue with Vasek's logic. She did something far more devastating. She demonstrated in real time the exact difference she had been pointing at. She said, "Delegate Vasek says showing your throat is foolish, and by his rules he's right. So let me show you the difference between his rules and ours, right now, in front of everyone, so you can decide which you'd rather trust." She turned to the room. Here is a real weakness of humanity that Vasek did not even mention, that I'll tell you myself freely right now. If the Threlian border collapses next cycle, and it might, humanity does not have the ships to hold our commitments in 3 different sectors at once. We would have to choose. We might fail an ally. That's a real vulnerability, a serious one, and I'm telling it to you openly in front of our rivals, because every power we're allied with deserves to know exactly what we can and can't do for them, so they can plan accordingly and never be surprised by us in a crisis. She paused. That's how we do it. Now, Delegate Vasek, in the spirit of helping the room choose, would you tell us one real weakness of the Esh? Just one freely, the way I just did. Show the room your throat, the way you say only fools do. Or, and I think this is what's about to happen, refuse, and show everyone exactly why no one in this room can ever actually trust a word you say. The silence after that was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Because Vasek was trapped completely in a trap built entirely out of honesty, which is the one trap a master of concealment has no tools to escape. If he admitted a real Esh weakness, he would be conceding Chen's entire point, playing her game, on her terms, validating the human way over the Esh way in front of the whole galaxy. And if he refused, as every instinct of his concealment soul demanded, he would prove, in front of everyone, exactly what Chen had said. That the Esh would never show their truth, could never be trusted, were exactly the hidden knife ally that no sane power would bind its fate to. He refused. Of course he refused. He could not do otherwise. An Esh revealing a true weakness was a contradiction in terms, a thing his entire being was built to prevent. He deflected, postured, tried to wave the question away as beneath response. And in refusing in front of the whole assembled galaxy, he completed his own destruction, because every power in that room watched the human ambassador openly reveal a real human vulnerability and then watched the Master physically unable to do the same, and the contrast was total, and it answered Chen's question for everyone, permanently. Which of these can you trust? The one who showed her throat. Obviously. Only ever the one who showed her throat. And in that moment, the treaties began to die, but they were treaties, not human ones. I watched it happen, and as a master of concealment myself, a Coredd diplomat who had spent my whole life wearing the masks, I felt something break open in me, some understanding I had spent my whole career avoiding. I had always believed what the believed, what the whole galaxy believed, that concealment was strength, that showing weakness was foolishness, that the powers who survived were the ones who never let anyone see their soft places. I had built my whole career on it. And I sat in that room and watched Ambassador Chen disprove it utterly, watched her win the room, win the galaxy, win the future, not by concealing better than the but by refusing to conceal at all, by being so completely, courageously honest that her honesty became a force the mastery of lies had no answer to. And I understood, sitting there, that I had spent my whole life mistaking a prison for a strength. The masks I had worn so skillfully had never made me strong. They had made me untrustworthy, isolated, a player in a game where everyone was alone behind their masks, and where no one could ever truly rely on anyone, because no one ever showed anyone the truth. Humanity had simply stepped out of the prison. They had looked at the galaxy's entire concealment game and declined to play it, had decided to be honest instead, and it had cost them. Yes, it had made them vulnerable. The had been right about that. Humanity's openness was a real vulnerability. But it had bought them the one thing the concealment game could never buy: trust. Real trust. The trust of a galaxy that knew, with humanity, exactly where it stood, because humanity showed them everything. And trust, it turned out, was worth more than every mask in the galaxy, because trust is the only thing alliances are actually made of, and humanity were the only people in the room who had any to offer. Ambassador Chen was not finished, and her last move that night was the one that turned the defeat into a transformation of the whole galaxy. She did not gloat. She did not press her advantage to crush the did not use the moment to expose weaknesses in return, did not do the thing the concealment game would have demanded of a victor. Instead, she turned the moment outward to the whole room and made it about something larger than the defeat. She said, "I'm not telling you this to destroy the delegation. I'm telling you because I think the whole galaxy has been trapped in the same game for a very long time, and it's a game where everybody loses, because everybody's alone behind a mask, and nobody can really trust anybody. And so every alliance is fragile, and every treaty is a guess, and the whole galaxy is more dangerous and more lonely than it has to be. Humanity stepped out of that game. Not because we're brave or wise, because, honestly, we tried the mask thing for a while and we were bad at it, and we noticed that being bad at lying made us better at being trusted, and we leaned into it. A few humans in the delegation actually smiled at that. So here's what I'd offer all of you instead of the game or any other. Try it. Tell each other the truth, including the hard truth, including where you're weak. Build your alliances on what's real instead of what you're projecting. It feels dangerous. It is a little dangerous, but it's the only foundation that holds, because it's the only one that's actually there. We'd rather have a galaxy of allies who know exactly where we're weak than a galaxy of rivals who will never see our knife. We think most of you would too, once you try it. The masks were never making any of us strong. They were just keeping us all alone. And I watched the whole room, the whole galaxy in that room begin, tentatively, terrified to take off its masks. By morning, the treaties had not survived the night. But it was the treaties that lay in ruins, and humanities that had multiplied. I want to tell you exactly what happened to the alliances in that room, because the title of this story promised that treaties would not survive the night, and that is true, and the truth of it is the whole point. Treaties died that night. The Esh, who had come to the summit to shatter humanity's standing and emerge as the galaxy's preferred partner, left it with their own alliances in collapse. Because every power that had been allied with the Esh, every power that had bound its fate to the masters of concealment, had just watched, in front of the whole galaxy, the Esh master Vasic be physically unable to tell a single true thing about his own people, while the human ambassador openly revealed real vulnerabilities without hesitation. And every Esh ally in that room asked themselves the question Chen had planted, the only question that matters. Can I trust the people I have bound my fate to? And for the Esh's allies, the answer, suddenly and undeniably, was no, because they had just watched the Esh demonstrate that the Esh would never, could never, show them the truth. And you cannot remain allied to a hidden knife once you have seen that it is a knife. The Esh alliances dissolved. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment, but over that night and the days that followed, power after power quietly withdrew from its arrangements with the Esh, because the summit had revealed what those arrangements actually were. Bets placed on a partner who could never be trusted, made by people who had not understood, until Chen made them understand that they were betting on a mask. And humanity's alliances multiplied, because the same demonstration that destroyed trust in the Esh created it, overwhelmingly, for humanity. Power after power, having watched Ambassador Chen show her throat freely in front of her rivals, concluded the thing the Esh had never imagined they would conclude. These are people we can trust. These are people who will tell us the truth, including the hard truth, including where they are weak, and therefore people we can actually rely on, actually bind our fate to, actually build something lasting with. The vulnerability the Esh had exposed to make humanity friendless made humanity, instead, the most sought-after ally in the galaxy, because the galaxy had just learned, in a single devastating night, that an ally who shows you their weakness is the only ally worth having. But the deeper thing, the thing that made that night matter beyond the fate of a few treaties, was what it did to galactic diplomacy itself. Because the powers in that room did not just rearrange their alliances. They had seen something, and they could not unsee it. They had watched the whole concealment game, the ancient game everyone had always played, be defeated in a single night by a people who simply refused to play it. And once you have seen that the game is not only losable but foolish, that the masks everyone wore so carefully were never making anyone strong, were only keeping everyone alone and untrusting and afraid, you cannot go back to playing it the same way. The summit became the beginning of a slow, halting, profound transformation in how the galaxy did diplomacy. It did not happen overnight, nothing real does. But over the years that followed, the galaxy began, power by power, to learn the thing humanity had taught it that night, to build alliances on honesty instead of masks, on shown truth instead of projected strength, on the radical and terrifying and ultimately liberating practice of telling each other where they were weak. It was hard. The concealment instinct ran deep. We had all spent our whole histories behind our masks, and taking them off felt like standing naked in a storm. But the powers that learned to do it discovered what humanity had discovered, that an alliance built on honesty is stronger than any alliance built on lies, because it is built on something real, and that a galaxy where powers tell each other the truth is a less dangerous and less lonely place than a galaxy where everyone hides. Humanity had not just won a summit. They had begun to heal the galaxy's oldest sickness, the sickness of the mask, the loneliness of a whole civilization where no one ever let anyone see the truth. I have to tell you what became of the Esh, because it is instructive, and because it is not entirely without mercy. The Esh fell, in the sense that their power had always rested on a thing that was now broken. Their mastery of concealment had been their whole strength, and the summit had exposed concealment itself as the real weakness, and so the Esh found themselves, in the new galaxy, holding a kind of power that no longer worked masters of a game that everyone was abandoning. Their alliances gone, their methods discredited, the Esh declined from the great power they had been into something much smaller. But here is the part that gives me hope, the part I did not expect. Some of the Esh learned. Not all of them, the proudest, the most committed to the old ways, could not, and they clung to their masks and dwindled with them. But some of the Esh, watching what had happened, watching humanity's honest alliances flourish while their own concealed ones collapsed, began to understand what humanity had understood and began, painfully, against the whole grain of their culture, to try a different way, to take off the mask, to tell the truth. And the Esh who learned to do that found, as everyone who learns it finds, that it was not the weakness they had always believed it to be, that being seen, truly seen, weaknesses and all, was not death but the beginning of being trusted, and that being trusted was worth more than all their mastery of lies had ever bought them. The Esh did not vanish. The ones who learned became, in time, something better than they had been. The mask had been their prison too. Some of them at last walked out of it. I have to tell you what became of me, because I was a master of masks myself, and I could not remain one after that night. I had spent my whole career as a Coredd diplomat playing the concealment game, wearing the masks, hiding my weaknesses, projecting a strength I did not always feel, and being, I understand now, profoundly alone behind all of it, the way everyone in the game was alone, trusting no one and trusted by no one, all of us isolated behind our careful surfaces. And I watched Ambassador Chen step out of the game in a single night and win everything by simply telling the truth. And I could not unsee what I had seen, could not go back behind my mask once I understood it was a prison. So I took it off. It was the hardest thing I have ever done and the most freeing. I began in my own diplomacy to do the human thing, to tell the truth, including the hard truth, including where I and my people were weak. It terrified me every time, the old concealment instinct screaming that I was showing my throat, inviting the knife. The knife never came. What came instead was the thing I had never had in all my years of masterful concealment: trust, real relationships. Allies who knew exactly where I stood and stood with me because of it. I had spent my whole career being skilled and alone. I spent the rest of it being honest and accompanied. And the second was so much better than the first that I grieve, a little, for all the years I wasted behind the mask, believing it was strength. I learned it from a human, in a single night, at a summit where aliens tried to expose Earth's weakness, and exposed instead the weakness of the whole galaxy's way of being. I am old now, and I tell this story to the young diplomats, the ones who have grown up in the more honest galaxy that night began to build, who do not remember the old world of universal masks and cannot quite believe it was ever that way. I tell them there was a time when the whole galaxy lied. Not from malice mostly, but from fear. The fear that to show a weakness was to invite destruction, so everyone hid everything, and everyone was alone, and no one could truly trust anyone. And the whole galaxy was more dangerous and more lonely than it ever needed to be. And I tell them how it changed, how, in a single night, at a single summit, an alien power tried to destroy humanity by exposing humanity's weakness in public, and how it backfired so completely that it remade the galaxy. Because the Esh were right that they had found a weakness. Humanity was vulnerable. They admitted their fears and their limits and their grief. By the old rules, they showed their throat constantly, foolishly, recklessly. The Esh exposed all of it, certain it would make humanity friendless. And humanity simply agreed, said, "Yes, that's all true, that's who we are, we won't pretend otherwise." And in agreeing, in being so completely, fearlessly honest in front of the whole galaxy, they revealed the thing the galaxy had never understood. That the courage to be seen, weaknesses and all, is not weakness. It is the deepest strength there is. Because it is the only foundation that trust can stand on, and trust is the only thing that holds a galaxy together. And a people brave enough to show you their throat are the only people you can ever truly turn your back to in safety, because they have already shown you they have no knife. Treaties don't survive the night, they said about that summit, and it was true. The treaties built on masks did not survive it. The treaties built on lies did not survive it. The whole rotten architecture of a galaxy that mistook concealment for strength did not survive it. But humanity's treaties survived, and multiplied, and held, because they were built on the one thing that lasts: the truth freely shown between people brave enough to let each other see them. The aliens tried to expose Earth's weakness. They succeeded. Earth's weakness was that humans cannot hide what they are. And it turned out to be the strongest thing in the galaxy, strong enough to win a summit, strong enough to break an empire of masks, strong enough to teach a whole frightened, lonely galaxy how to finally, after all those careful hidden ages, trust each other. The masks never made us strong. The humans showed us that. They showed us by showing us themselves, all of themselves, weaknesses and all, and trusting us to see. And in the end, that trust was the most powerful thing any of us had ever been given. It still is.